The prophecy speaks of this moment. The true heir lives, hidden among the merchants.
Long before memory could count the years, there stood an African kingdom wrapped in power and mystery. Its lands were rich. Its people were proud. Its borders were guarded not only by warriors, but by spirits older than the rivers and stronger than the mountains. The soil yielded food without struggle, and enemies thought twice before speaking its name. This was a kingdom feared by outsiders, respected by allies, and protected by unseen forces. At the center of it all sat a king. He ruled with wisdom that crossed generations. His judgments were fair. His word was law. When he spoke, even the wind seemed to pause and listen. Elders praised his leadership. Warriors bowed their heads in honor. The people trusted him with their lives. Yet there was something deeply unsettling about their king. No one had ever seen him laugh. Not once. Not during festivals filled with drums and dancing. Not during celebrations of victory. Not even when children sang praises before the throne. The king's face was calm, controlled, carved like stone. His eyes carried depth, but never delight. His lips never curved into a smile. And wherever he walked, silence followed like a shadow. In the palace, servants moved softly, afraid to make unnecessary noise. Laughter died the moment his footsteps echoed through the halls. Conversations lowered into whispers. Joy, though not forbidden by law, felt forbidden by fear. The people learned early that happiness had limits. They said laughter was dangerous. Mothers warned their children not to laugh near the palace gates. Elders avoided jokes in public gatherings. Even celebrations were carefully measured, as if joy itself might awaken something terrible. No one dared to ask why. Stories passed quietly from mouth to mouth. Some said the king had seen horrors no man should see. Others believed the throne carried a curse older than the kingdom itself. A few whispered that the spirits demanded silence from their ruler, and any joy would anger them. But no one knew the truth. At night, when the kingdom slept, the king often stood alone on his balcony. Below him, fires flickered in distant homes. Laughter rose faintly from faraway villages, soft and careful. He listened, not with anger but with longing. Something heavy lived inside his chest. A pain buried so deep that even he feared touching it. The throne he sat on was carved with sacred symbols, passed down through bloodlines and rituals. It was said that every king left something of himself behind when he ruled, his strength, his wisdom, or his soul. This king had left his joy. The spirits still guarded the land. The kingdom still stood strong. But beneath the peace lay tension, like the quiet before a storm. The people felt it. The elders feared it. And the king carried it every day like an invisible chain. Whatever had stolen laughter from his life had not only shaped his rule, it had shaped the fate of the entire kingdom. And deep within the palace walls, buried beneath secrets and ancient lies, rested the truth. A truth so powerful that one laugh could either destroy everything, or finally set the king free. Before silence became his armor, before fear settled into his bones, the king was once a child filled with light. In those early years when he was only a prince, laughter followed him wherever he went. It rang through palace courtyards and spilled into village paths. He laughed with his whole body, head thrown back, eyes shining, feet always moving as if joy itself pushed him forward. The people loved him not because he was royal but because he was warm, curious, and kind. He ran freely among the children of the kingdom, barefoot and smiling. He chased goats through the grass, splashed water in the river, and asked endless questions about the world beyond the hills. When elders told stories by firelight, he sat close, listening with wide eyes and an open heart. Hope lived easily inside him. But no bond shaped him more than the one he shared with his mother. She was gentle, wise, and deeply protective. Her voice was calm like evening rain, and her touch carried comfort. When the young prince laughed, she smiled as if the sun had risen just for her. She encouraged his joy, believing that a king who understood happiness would one day rule with compassion. Often she watched him play and whispered prayers, not for power but for safety, because she knew something others did not. His father, the reigning king, was a very different man. He was strong, disciplined, and bound tightly to tradition. His life was ruled by ancient laws and sacred customs passed down through generations. He believed the kingdom survived because its kings obeyed the spirits without question. Where the mother saw love, the father saw duty. The former king rarely smiled, but he respected his son. He watched the boy's joy with mixed feelings, pride tangled with unease. At times, when the prince laughed too freely during sacred rituals or spoke boldly in the presence of elders, the king's expression hardened. There were rules even children were not meant to bend. Whispers followed the prince as he grew. Some elders exchanged worried glances when his laughter echoed too loudly. Spiritual leaders burned extra incense after he passed. They spoke in hushed voices about balance, restraint, and signs. To them, the boy's happiness was not harmless, it was powerful. And power, they believed, must always be controlled. On the night the prince was born, long before he took his first breath, the royal diviners had gathered. They studied the stars, cast bones upon sacred cloth, and listened for messages from the unseen world. What they saw filled them with fear. A prophecy had been spoken. It warned that this child's laughter carried danger, that his joy, once seated upon the throne, would shake the balance between the spirit world and the living. That laughter from a crowned king would awaken forces meant to sleep. The prophecy was not spoken aloud in the palace halls. It was sealed in ritual and silence. But its shadow lingered. As the prince grew, small signs fed the elders' fears. Animals grew restless when he laughed during sacred moments. Winds shifted. Fires crackled strangely. Nothing disastrous happened, but enough to stir anxiety in hearts already ruled by fear. The prince, unaware of all this, continued to live with open joy. He trusted the world. He trusted his family. He trusted that love was stronger than fear. Sometimes, late at night, his mother would hold him close longer than needed. She would study his face while he slept, as if memorizing every detail. Her smiles were soft, but her eyes often carried worry. She knew what the elders feared, and she knew what they might do. So she chose love over tradition, silence over truth, protection over obedience. The prophecy was hidden from the prince. He was allowed to laugh, allowed to dream, allowed to believe his joy was a gift, not a threat. But fate is patient. And while the boy's laughter filled the kingdom with light, the ancient warning waited quietly in the dark, counting time, preparing its price. The child of promise and joy was growing. And one day the world would ask him to choose between his happiness and his destiny. Even as the young prince grew in joy and light, whispers of shadow moved quietly through the palace walls. The elders, keepers of tradition and interpreters of the unseen, had never forgotten the prophecy spoken the night he was born. They called him the child of laughter, a blessing to some, a danger to all. When he turned 7, the royal diviners gathered once more, deep in the inner sanctum of the palace, far from playful eyes. They arranged bones on sacred cloth, lit fires with herbs that twisted the air into thick, heady smoke, and called upon the ancestors to speak. What the spirits revealed shook them to their cores. The prophecy had been precise. If the child of laughter rises to the throne and dares to smile or laugh, the spirits will turn away. Rivers will dry, the earth will tremble, and the blood of the kingdom will stain its soil. Only silence shall hold the balance. Only sorrow shall protect the crown. The elders debated in hushed, urgent voices. Some demanded the child be removed from the palace or worse. Others argued for secret restrictions, careful training, and constant supervision. Their fear was not of the boy, but of the forces he might awaken. Outside the council chambers, the young prince continued to laugh. He chased butterflies through the gardens, his feet barely touching the ground. He tumbled through the sunlit courtyard with his friends, his mother watching nearby, her heart swelling with pride. The joy of a child was meant to be sacred. And yet, to the elders, every sound of happiness was a spark in dry grass, waiting to ignite a disaster centuries in the making. The king's mother, wise, loving, and defiant, could not bear the thought of taking her child's light from him. She had witnessed his laughter, had seen the kindness it inspired, and she understood its power to heal rather than harm. When the elders warned her of the prophecy, she refused to let fear dictate their lives. "I will not let you kill his joy to save a kingdom that cannot survive without love," she said quietly, her voice trembling with conviction. "We will raise him with wisdom, with care, and with hope. But we will not take from him the gift of laughter. Not today. Not ever." So she chose love over tradition. She chose protection over obedience. The prophecy was hidden from the young prince. And yet, in hiding the truth, she planted the seeds of a secret that would one day demand a terrible price. The elders reluctantly agreed to her decision, though their eyes remained cold. They watched the boy closely, taking note of every smile, every burst of laughter. Every step he took in innocence was measured against an unseen scale of judgment. As the prince grew, small warnings appeared. Shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally when he played near the sacred shrines. Winds whispered through empty halls and patterns the diviners interpreted as omens. Even animals that roamed the palace grounds behaved strangely in his presence. Still he laughed. Still he lived. And still, his mother encouraged him, shielding him from the growing tension like a mother lion protecting her cub. The palace was a kingdom of two realities. In the sunlit gardens and laughter-filled halls, the prince was free, happy, and loved. But in the corridors of power, where incense burned and secrets whispered, the prophecy lingered like a shadow that refused to leave. No one dared explain to the child that his joy could destroy everything he loved. They could not. So the prince grew, beloved by the people, ignorant of the danger he carried like a flame in the dark. And while the world around him prepared for a silence he could not yet imagine, he danced, played, and laughed with a heart as open as the sky. The stage was set. The boy of promise, born to laughter, carried a secret that would shape his destiny. And one day when he would rise to wear the crown, the world would demand a choice, to obey fear, or to reclaim the light that had always been his. For now the prophecy waited, patient and cruel, like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. The child laughed. The kingdom held its breath. And the ancient warning whispered through the palace walls. One day laughter will cost everything. For many years, the prophecy slept quietly beneath the surface of palace life. The prince continued to grow, strong in body and gentle in spirit. His laughter still rose with the morning sun, and his kindness spread easily among the people. Yet beneath the peace, something unseen was shifting. The change came without warning. One season the rains arrived late. The air grew heavy and the elders became restless. They gathered more often, speaking in low voices and performing rituals that lasted deep into the night. Fires burned longer than usual, and sacred drums echoed through the darkness. The palace no longer felt safe. It felt watched. The prince noticed the tension but did not understand it. He asked his mother why the elders looked afraid, why the servants whispered when they thought he could not hear. She smiled gently and told him not to worry. Still, her hands often trembled when she held his. Then one night everything changed. The elders declared that the spirits were displeased and demanded a cleansing ritual, one meant to restore balance between the unseen world and the living. It was an old ritual, rarely used, dangerous in its power. Only those of royal blood were allowed near it. The queen, his mother, volunteered. She said it was her duty to protect the kingdom and her family. She said the spirits listened more closely to a mother's heart. The prince begged to follow her, but she refused, holding his face in her hands, her eyes shining with tears she would not let fall. "Stay," she told him softly. "Be strong." That was the last time he heard her voice. The ritual took place beyond the palace walls, near a sacred grove where no child was allowed. Fires were lit. Incense filled the air. Elders chanted prayers older than language itself. The night grew unnaturally still. Then the wind screamed. By morning the queen was gone. The elders said the spirits had taken her. They claimed her sacrifice had saved the kingdom from disaster. No body was returned. No clear explanation was given. Only silence followed, thick and heavy, like a wound that refused to heal. The prince felt something break inside him. He searched the palace, calling for his mother. He waited by the gates. He refused food. When he finally understood she would not return, grief crashed over him like a storm. For the first time in his life he did not laugh. Not because he was told not to. Not because of fear or command. But because joy had left him. Days passed. Then weeks. His smile faded. His eyes grew distant. The boy who once ran freely through the kingdom now walked slowly, carrying a pain far too heavy for his young heart. The elders watched him closely. They whispered that the prophecy was beginning. That the spirits had accepted their warning. That laughter was dangerous and silence was proof of obedience. The prince overheard fragments of their words. Enough to poison his thoughts. He began to believe his happiness had caused his mother's death. Every memory of laughter turned sharp with guilt. Every joyful moment felt like a crime he had not known he was committing. He blamed himself for loving life too freely, for being too loud, too happy, too alive. His father, now colder than ever, retreated further into tradition. He did not comfort the boy. He prepared him. Lessons became stricter. Rituals became heavier. The prince was taught discipline instead of joy, restraint instead of curiosity. His grief was shaped into obedience. At night, the prince lay awake, staring into darkness. He replayed his mother's smile, her touch, her voice. He wondered what she had seen in her final moments. He wondered if she had died afraid or proud. No one answered his questions. No one told him the truth. The laughter that once filled the palace never returned. In its place grew silence, deep and lasting. The boy who had been a symbol of joy became a symbol of loss. And the elders nodded in quiet approval. They believed the kingdom had been spared. But they did not see what had truly been taken. A child's laughter had died with his mother. And in its absence, a future king was being shaped by grief, guilt, and a lie that would follow him all the way to the throne. The day the prince became king arrived under a sky heavy with clouds. Drums echoed across the kingdom, slow and solemn. Warriors lined the roads in perfect rows, their spears pointed toward the earth. The people gathered in silence, dressed in ceremonial cloth, their faces calm but tense. This was not a celebration of joy. It was a ritual of duty. The prince walked toward the sacred throne with steady steps. He was no longer a boy. Grief had hardened him, shaping his face and quieting his spirit. Where laughter once lived, discipline now ruled. His eyes carried wisdom beyond his years, but also a deep, unspoken sorrow. The throne waited in the center of the great courtyard, carved from ancient wood, marked with symbols of ancestors and spirits. It had carried many kings and each had left something behind. As the prince approached it, the air felt thick as if the unseen world leaned closer to watch. The elders surrounded him, their robes flowing, their faces unreadable. Incense burned in wide bowls, and the smoke curled upward like restless spirits. Sacred drums stopped. Silence fell. The former king stepped forward. His voice was firm, shaped by years of tradition. He placed the crown upon his son's head and stepped back without ceremony. In that moment the boy became king, not through joy but through burden. Then the elders spoke. They reminded the new king of ancient laws, of balance between the living and the spirits. They spoke of sacrifice, of obedience, of the cost of peace. Their words were heavy, layered with fear disguised as wisdom. Finally they delivered the command. The king must never laugh. Not in private. Not in public. Not in thought or spirit. They said laughter would invite disaster. That joy would break the bond with the ancestors. That silence was the only shield strong enough to protect the kingdom. The command was sealed with ritual. A blade cut the king's palm. His blood fell onto sacred soil. The elders mixed it with ash and herbs, marking his forehead. An oath was spoken, binding his body, his spirit, and his crown to silence. The king did not argue. He believed them. He remembered his mother's death. He remembered his own laughter fading into grief. In his heart he still carried guilt, and guilt made obedience feel like duty. If silence could protect his people, he would accept it. From that day forward the palace changed. Walls that once echoed with life grew cold. Servants moved like shadows, afraid to meet the king's eyes. Drums were quieter. Celebrations shortened. Even the wind seemed to pass the palace with care. The king ruled with discipline and fairness. He listened more than he spoke. When he judged disputes, his decisions were just. But his face remained unreadable, his heart locked away. Inside him, a war had begun. Duty told him silence was strength. Humanity whispered that something precious had been taken. He felt moments when laughter tried to rise, memories of childhood, flashes of warmth, but he crushed them quickly, afraid of what they might bring. Each time he did, the weight on his chest grew heavier. The elders watched with satisfaction. They believed the kingdom was safe. But safety came at a price. The king stood tall upon the throne, powerful and respected, yet deeply alone. He had given up joy not because he wished to, but because he believed he had no choice. And so the reign of the silent king began. A reign built on sacrifice, fear, and a promise written in blood. A promise that would one day demand to be broken. Years passed, and the silent king remained upon the throne. Under his rule the kingdom grew strong. Trade routes expanded. Granaries stayed full. Borders remained secure. Other rulers spoke his name with respect, even fear. On the surface, his reign was a success. But beneath the order, something was missing. Joy slowly disappeared from the heart of the land. Festivals were still held, but they felt empty. Drums beat without passion. Dancers moved carefully, watching the palace gates instead of losing themselves in rhythm. Songs were sung, but softly, as if joy itself had learned to be afraid. Children no longer ran freely near the palace. Mothers pulled them close when the king's guards passed. Laughter, once natural and bright, became rare and cautious. The people believed the silence of their king was necessary, but they also believed joy was dangerous. Inside the palace, the silence was even deeper. Servants spoke only when spoken to. Footsteps were measured. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. The king moved through these halls like a shadow, present, powerful, and alone. He listened to counsels. He signed laws. He judged disputes with fairness. Yet he never smiled, never laughed, never allowed himself to soften. Advisors soon learned how to use this. They filled the quiet with their own voices. They twisted facts, hid truths, and guided decisions to serve their own ambitions. Because the king did not show emotion, they assumed he felt none. And because he rarely questioned loudly, they believed him easy to shape. They were wrong, but they were also dangerous. The king saw their greed. He sensed their lies. But silence had become his habit, and breaking it felt like breaking an oath. Each day he held his tongue, the distance between him and his people grew wider. At night, when the palace slept, the king often sat alone in his chambers. He stared into the dark, remembering a time when laughter had come easily. He remembered his mother's smile, her warmth, her belief that joy made people strong. Those memories hurt more than wounds. He longed for connection, for someone who would see him not as a curse or a ruler, but as a man. Yet fear held him back. The prophecy lived inside him, whispering that joy would destroy everything he had sworn to protect. So he remained silent. The people respected him, but they did not love him. They obeyed his laws, but they did not feel close to him. His presence brought order, but never comfort. Even nature seemed to respond to the absence of joy. The land remained fertile, but the seasons felt heavy. The air often hung still as if waiting. Birds avoided the palace grounds. Fires burned low and slow. The elders claimed this was proof of balance. The king wondered if it was proof of loss. Sometimes, from far beyond the palace walls, faint laughter drifted in from distant villages. It reached him like an echo from another life. He listened carefully, feeling both relief and pain. Relief that joy still existed somewhere. Pain that it could not exist within him. He told himself the sacrifice was worth it. That his loneliness was a small price to pay for peace. That a king's heart was not his own. But deep inside, a quiet truth stirred. A kingdom ruled without joy may survive, but it cannot truly live. And though the silent king did not yet know it, change was already moving toward him, soft, fearless, and unexpected. Soon, someone would step into his quiet world. Someone who did not fear silence. Change did not arrive with thunder or ceremony. It came quietly, like a gentle breeze slipping through a closed door. She was not born in the palace, nor raised among nobles or priests. She came from the outer lands where life was simple and laughter still lived freely. She was known for her kindness, her courage, and her deep respect for life. People trusted her because she listened. They admired her because she cared. Fate brought her to the palace through service, not ambition. She was chosen to assist in caring for the sick and the weary, those who suffered quietly under the weight of silence. When she first crossed the palace gates, she felt the heaviness in the air. The walls seemed cold. The halls felt watched. Yet she did not turn back. When she first saw the king, she noticed what others feared. His power was clear. His posture was strong. But behind his still face she saw loneliness. His eyes were not cruel, they were tired. And in that tiredness she recognized pain. Unlike others, she did not lower her gaze in fear. She greeted him with respect, not trembling. She did not try to please him or avoid him. She treated him as a man, not a curse. The king noticed. At first, he observed her in silence as he did with everyone. But her presence felt different. Where she walked, tension softened. Servants spoke more freely when she was near. The air felt lighter, though no one could explain why. She spoke gently but honestly. She asked questions others avoided. She spoke of healing, not just of the body but of the heart. She believed pain was meant to be faced, not buried. Slowly the king found himself listening. He did not speak much, but he watched her. He noticed her patience with the sick, her kindness to servants, her calm courage in a place ruled by fear. She did not try to make him smile. She did not push or challenge him openly. She simply existed without fear. And that alone was dangerous. With her presence, emotions long buried inside the king began to stir. Memories returned. Warmth flickered where only discipline had lived. He felt moments of peace he had not known in years. Hope frightened him. He reminded himself of the prophecy, of his oath, of the price his mother had paid. Yet the more time passed, the harder it became to believe that something so gentle could bring destruction. The elders noticed the change. They saw the king linger longer during gatherings. They saw him listen more closely. They felt the shift in the air, and it terrified them. A king who felt again was a king who might question. They warned the woman to keep her distance. They spoke of rules and traditions. But she did not bend easily. She believed healing came from truth, not fear. And without realizing it, she had already done the unthinkable. She had awakened the king's heart. The silence around him was no longer empty. It was waiting. And the curse that ruled his life had begun to crack, just enough for danger or freedom to slip through. The moment came without warning. It was not during a grand event or a sacred ritual. It happened on an ordinary evening, when the palace was quiet and the sky glowed with fading light. The king stood in the inner courtyard, watching shadows stretch across the stone floor. She was there as well. They spoke of simple things, of healing herbs, of the way pain slowly releases its grip when met with patience. For once, the king felt no weight pressing against his chest. The silence between them was not heavy. It was gentle. Then she said something unexpected. It was small, almost harmless, but it carried warmth, truth, humanity. Something inside the king shifted. A sound rose in his chest, soft, unfamiliar, unstoppable. His lips trembled. His breath caught. For the first time in years, a laugh almost escaped him. The world reacted. The ground trembled beneath their feet. A sudden wind tore through the courtyard, scattering leaves and lifting dust into the air. Clouds gathered fast overhead, dark and violent. Distant thunder rolled, shaking the palace walls. The woman froze. The king's heart pounded as fear crashed back into him. He forced the sound down, crushing it before it could be born. His face hardened. His hands clenched. The storm did not stop. Across the kingdom, animals panicked. Fires flickered wildly. Sacred drums fell silent as elders rushed from their chambers, shouting warnings. They claimed the prophecy was awakening, that the balance was breaking. Their eyes found the woman. They accused her of tempting the king, of stirring forbidden emotion, of challenging the spirits. Fear turned quickly into blame. She was seized. The king stood frozen, torn between everything he believed and everything he felt. The storm raged above, mirroring the chaos inside him. He wanted to speak, to protect her, to tell the truth he did not yet fully understand. But fear won. He remained silent. The woman was taken away, her calm dignity unbroken. She did not cry. She did not beg. She only looked at the king, disappointed but still compassionate. That look hurt more than the storm. The elders declared the danger contained. They claimed the king's restraint had saved the kingdom. Rituals were performed through the night to restore order. By morning the sky cleared. But something inside the king shattered. He had felt joy, real human joy, and he had crushed it. He had chosen tradition over truth, fear over love. The silence returned, heavier than ever. And now it was no longer protecting him. It was destroying him. In the quiet that followed, the king knew one thing for certain. The curse was real, but it was not what he had been taught. And somewhere in the shadows of the palace, the truth waited to be uncovered. The truth came slowly, like sunlight creeping through a locked door. It arrived not in celebration, not in fanfare, but in whispers and shadows, carried by an old, trembling voice. A dying elder, one of the few who had witnessed the secret from decades past, summoned the king to a hidden chamber deep within the palace. The walls were lined with scrolls, herbs, and relics that no one else was allowed to touch. The air was thick with the scent of incense and age, a reminder of centuries of tradition and secrets. The elder's eyes, cloudy with time yet sharp with urgency, met the king's. "You have been betrayed," the elder croaked. "All these years, the prophecy, it was never true. Not truly. It was a lie. A story written to control the throne." The king froze. His heart pounded, and the weight that had pressed on him for decades seemed to shift, as if the room itself had tilted. "Laughter," the elder continued, "was never cursed. Joy was never forbidden. Only fear was. Fear used to keep kings obedient, to make them controllable, to ensure the power of the elders remained unchallenged." For a moment the king could not breathe. The silence he had carried all his life felt suddenly suffocating in a new way, built not on duty or protection, but on deceit. "And your mother," the elder said, voice breaking. "She did not die to satisfy a prophecy. She died to protect you, from the lie. From the fear that would consume you as it almost consumed the kingdom." The king's hands shook. Memories flooded him. The laughter of his childhood, the warmth of his mother's smile, the grief that had hardened him, the oath of blood that had chained him. He had carried all of it alone, believing it was his duty. Believing that his joy would destroy the world. Now he understood the true cost. Not joy, not laughter, but the fear that had been imposed upon him. Anger rose first, sharp and burning. He thought of the years spent in silence, the people who had loved him from afar yet never truly known him, the advisors who manipulated him, and the elders who had hidden the truth. Betrayal was a poison in his veins. Then sorrow came, heavier than anger, heavier than fear. The sorrow of a life lived under a false shadow. A sorrow for the mother who had died protecting him, for the laughter that had been stolen, for the kingdom that had been silenced. And in that sorrow, a spark of clarity. If he continued to obey the lie, the kingdom would remain strong, yes, but it would never live. Joy would remain forbidden. Fear would remain ruler. Silence would continue to suffocate. He could not allow that. The elders' words had set him free, even as they burned. Truth was a weapon now, and the king grasped it tightly. He would confront the lies, the fear, the manipulators, and the spirits themselves if he must. For the first time in decades, he felt a flicker of something he had almost forgotten: hope. He rose from his knees, eyes clear and determined. The palace no longer seemed heavy. The corridors no longer whispered threats. The silence around him was no longer a chain. It was an echo of the truth he would finally speak. The king would reclaim his life. The king would reclaim his kingdom. And the prophecy, the lie that had haunted him, would finally be exposed for what it was: a tool of fear, not destiny. The storm that had raged in his heart for so long now had a direction. It would no longer destroy him. It would set him free. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, yet it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. The king stood in the sacred hall, surrounded by the spirits of his ancestors. Their faces shimmered faintly in the ethereal light, neither angry nor approving, simply watching. The wind carried whispers of centuries, and the walls of the hall seemed alive with every king who had come before him. This was the moment he had feared and longed for. The choice lay before him: continue living in fear, obey the false prophecy, and rule a kingdom without joy, or reclaim his humanity and risk everything. The elders stood behind him, their expressions hard, eyes full of warning. "Do not forget," they said. "Laughter will bring ruin. Silence preserves the land. Obey the oath." The woman who had challenged him was there too, her hand brushing his shoulder. She offered no words, only trust, warmth, and the quiet courage that had awakened something inside him years ago. For a long moment he considered obedience. Fear still lingered, a shadow from a lifetime of lies. He remembered his mother, the oath of blood, the chaos of the storm when he almost laughed. He thought of the kingdom, of all who depended on him. Could he risk it all? And then he remembered the truth. The prophecy had been a lie. Fear had been the chain. His mother had died protecting him from deceit, not from destiny. Silence had been a prison, not a shield. And through it all, the spark of laughter, the human joy he had once known, still waited inside him, ready to be freed. He drew a deep breath. The hall seemed to pause with him. Even the spirits leaned closer, waiting. The first sound that escaped his lips was hesitant, almost a whisper, a chuckle, soft and trembling. It rose slowly, gathering warmth, gathering strength. Then another, louder, more confident. The king laughed, not in mockery, not in rebellion, but in release. The laughter rolled through the hall, carrying with it every year of fear, sorrow, and grief. The walls vibrated, the air shimmered, and the spirits seemed to bow in recognition, not anger. For the first time the king's heart felt unbound. Outside the kingdom trembled, not in destruction but in response. The skies cleared, the rivers flowed brighter, the winds carried songs of life. The people, sensing a shift in the air, dared to smile, dared to hope. Children laughed freely once more. The elders could only watch. The fear they had wielded for generations dissolved in the sound of truth. Their power waned, replaced by the undeniable strength of a king who had chosen courage over compliance, love over fear. The woman stepped forward, her eyes reflecting pride and relief. The king took her hand. Together they stood not as ruler and subject, but as two hearts who had faced fear and survived. The spirits did not strike. The land did not crumble. There was no destruction. Only balance, restored by honesty, by bravery, and by the reclaimed light of a human soul. The king laughed again, fully this time without restraint. It was a sound that echoed through the palace and into the hearts of his people. It was a sound that healed old wounds and promised new beginnings. He had chosen life, joy, and truth over fear and silence. And the kingdom, once ruled by shadow, finally breathed freely. The kingdom had changed. It was not a transformation marked by grand monuments or battles won, but by something far deeper: the return of life, color, and laughter. Streets once hushed now rang with the chatter of children playing. Markets overflowed with music and song. Even the wind seemed lighter, carrying the scent of rain and flowers, as if the land itself had been waiting for this moment. The king walked among his people, no longer a distant shadow on a throne, but a man among them. His face carried lines of grief, wisdom, and finally joy. He smiled freely. He laughed openly. And when the people saw him, they smiled back without fear, without hesitation. Festivals returned with new energy. Drums pulsed like heartbeats, dancers spun with abandon, and songs rose into the sky as if the spirits themselves were joining. Children ran through the palace gardens again, unafraid, their laughter echoing like a promise. The people learned that joy could exist alongside responsibility, that love and duty were not enemies but allies. The elders, once the keepers of fear, now served as guides, humbled by truth. They understood that wisdom was not silence and power was not control. It was compassion, courage, and honesty. The lessons of the past were not erased but reframed. The king did not forget the price of silence. He remembered his mother, her courage, and the grief that had shaped him. He carried those memories as strength, not chains. And in doing so, he became a leader who ruled not only with justice but with humanity. Stories of the cursed prophecy became lessons, told not to frighten but to teach, that fear enslaves but truth heals, that silence can protect but joy can liberate, that love and courage are stronger than any lie. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the palace gardens glowed with the last light of day, the king would often stand among his people, listening to their laughter. It was a sound he had almost forgotten, but now it filled him completely. The kingdom had learned to smile again, and so had its king. For the first time in his life he knew peace, not the hollow peace of obedience but the full, living peace of truth and joy. And under the stars, with the wind carrying laughter across the land, the king finally rested, free at last. The curse was gone. The kingdom lived. And the heart of a man once bound by fear now beat with the simple, unstoppable power of happiness reclaimed.